Hello, everyone, and welcome. Here are some of the stories we have for you right now. An early battle for the ballot, confirmation of a snap Ontario election.
We need a mandate from the people to fight against Donald Trump's tariffs.
What's behind the call as the province prepares to head to the polls?
I called for 4 debates between the candidates.
A frontrunner's open challenge to all contenders in the Liberal leadership race.
You'd have better health coverage. You'd have much better health coverage.
Trump's new taunt, the presidential prescription to make Canada into a state.
To me, that indicates trafficking.
And missing arsenal, investigating how dozens of firearms were stolen from the RCMP.
CTV National News with Heather Butts.
Well, it's now confirmed Ontarians will be heading to the polls more than a year ahead of schedule. Premier Doug Ford says an early election will be called next week, with voting day expected to be February 27th. CTV's Adrian Gobriel now on what Ford had to say and the timing of it all. Adrian.
Heather, the worst kept secret in Ontario politics has been confirmed. Premier Doug Ford announcing today he will be calling a snap election next week to receive a clear mandate to take on Donald Trump and the tariff war knocking on Canada's door.
Right now, there's a lack of leadership at the federal level. And at the federal level, we don't know who's going to be the next prime minister. Right now, we need strong leadership in this country. We need strong leadership in this province.
The decision comes with Ford soaring in the polls, though with a majority government already in hand and Ontario's next scheduled election more than a year away, some believe this is nothing more than a savvy political power play by Ontario's premier.
No, I don't think he needs a renewed mandate. He has a mandate for a fixed period of time.
Ford will be hitting the campaign trail just as Donald Trump has pledged to slap Canada with historic tariffs that could plunge Ontario and the country into a recession. Ford is pledging to stay focused on Washington.
During this election, I'll still be premier. Every single day, I'll be talking to our ministers. We'll be getting policies out there. I will be going down as the chair of the Federation, along with all my colleagues, all the premiers, down to Washington.
At this time where he should be preparing us and protecting our jobs, the only job he wants to protect is his own.
Though with Ford taking a front seat in the offensive against Trump's tariffs, there's a belief that his campaign's sole focus won't be his political opponents.
Premier Ford will be running not against the leader of the official opposition, the NDP, or of the third party, the Ontario Liberal Party. He'll be running against Donald Trump.
The election, which will take place on February 27th, is expected to cost taxpayers between $150 to $175 million. Heather.
All right, Adrian, thank you. The federal Liberals met on Parliament Hill for the second day in a row as they plot their post-Trudeau future. Chrystia Freeland penned an open letter to her leadership rivals, calling on them to run in the next election regardless of who is the leader. CTV's Jeremy Sharon is on the Hill for us tonight with more. And what else was in that letter, Jeremy?
Yeah, Heather, this letter appears to be an attempt by Chrystia Freeland to put some pressure on Mark Carney, a perceived frontrunner who has been gaining momentum and has significant support among caucus and cabinet. Now, in a letter to CTV News responding to a request to comment on this, Mark Carney's team has confirmed that he is committed to running in the next general election. Now, also part of that letter is a push for 4 Liberal leadership debates, 2 in French, 2 in English. Here's a little more from Chrystia Freeland earlier today on why she released this letter.
This is an important contest. We are choosing the next leader of the Liberal Party. That means that we're choosing the next Prime Minister of Canada. It's really important to give all Canadians a chance to see the candidates in action, to hear what they have to say, to hear what they have to offer Canadians.
Now, 7 candidates have officially submitted their paperwork. That means signatures, 300 signatures supporting their bid for Liberal leadership, and an initial $50,000 fee, part of a larger $350,000 that they're required to to raise in order to run in this leadership race. The deadline to raise those funds is February 17th. This all feels very much like the beginning of this Liberal leadership campaign, and it has felt that way in Ottawa. We saw some of the leaders yesterday holding private events, trying to shore up support among Liberal MPs. Two other significant deadlines to keep in mind. The first is January 27th. That's the deadline to register as a Liberal, required to vote in this Liberal leadership race. And then, of course, March 9th, which is when the Liberals will select their next leader. Now, one more thing to touch on that has just broken in the last few minutes. Karina Gould, who is, of course, running for Liberal leadership, has been replaced as government House leader by Stephen McKinnon, who is the Minister of Employment, Workforce Development and Labour. He will take on this additional role, a role that he has already held. Presumably, all of this happening because Karina Gould is taking part in this Liberal leadership race, Heather.
Okay, Jeremy, thank you for that. Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre is detailing how he would retaliate to U.S. tariffs if he were Prime Minister.
And I would target products and services that, A, we don't need, B, we can make ourselves, and C, that we can buy elsewhere so that we maximize impact on the Americans while minimizing impact on Canadians.
In a sit-down interview with CTV Atlantic, Poilievre said he'd pass an emergency tax cut on work, investment, making things in Canada, energy and home building. He also called for more free trade between provinces and new pipelines to increase exports overseas. Many Canadian consumers are advocating for a Buy Canadian approach, but depending on the product, it's not always feasible, even when the item is doing just that, promoting Canadian industry. CTV's John Van Valley Rao joins us with more. And John, it's not always that straightforward.
Heather, finding clothing that is 100% Canadian made can be difficult. And when it comes to one item in particular with a message aimed at Donald Trump, it is shining a spotlight on that issue.
Standing up for the country.
When Ontario's premier wore this ball cap last week with the words "Canada is not for sale," sales of those hats skyrocketed.
Many tens of thousands of hats have been sold directly to customers.
And at several embroidery houses around Toronto, they're now working flat out 7 days a week, trying to keep up with demand.
Running these hats, can't wait to get them in your hands.
But while embroidered here, the hats themselves are mostly made overseas in places like Bangladesh. The guy behind them has been desperate to find somewhere in Canada to make them, but no one seems to have the capacity to deliver tens of thousands quickly.
A lot of the companies have died off, several in the last few years.
Because of globalization, a lot of production is now done outside the country, and just a couple of ball cap makers remain in Canada. It's all drawing attention to the loss of manufacturing capacity. Julie Brown runs a store that proudly sells made-in-Canada clothing, including hats. She's seen a surge in supportive messages and hopes if demand increases, it may bring more manufacturing back home.
So yeah, I mean, the more Canadians buy Canadian, the more those industries will grow. So, we need people to buy Canadian.
As for the Canada is not for sale hats, 1,000 were shipped out today, and they plan to ship out 4,000 more starting on Monday. Heather?
John, thank you. As calls grow to support Canadian businesses in the face of U.S. tariff threats, one company is seeing red over comments the Prime Minister made about ketchup.
The example from last time was Heinz's ketchup being replaced by French's ketchup because French's was still using Canadian tomatoes.
Kraft Heinz responded, saying it's deeply disappointed that Prime Minister Trudeau has made misleading statements. The company says, while it's true during the last trade spat with the U.S., it wasn't making ketchup in Canada, it has since reopened Canadian production in Quebec using Ontario tomatoes. The federal government is demanding Amazon immediately reconsider its decision to close its distribution centers in Quebec, putting as many as 3,000 people out of work, threatening to review its commercial relationship with the online retail giant. CTV's Judy Trin is following the story for some stern language from the industry minister today. Judy.
Heather, after the industry minister released a scathing letter criticizing Amazon's business practices, the company has now agreed to meet with federal and provincial officials. Amazon's announcement that it was shuttering all 7 of its distribution warehouses in Quebec means as many as 3,000 workers and drivers could lose their jobs. The sudden decision angered the federal industry minister.
This is also about treating Canada with respect. Not only we had a discussion yesterday, but in a way that is hard for me to understand, they did not even mention to me that they would lay off more people after we had our conversation. I have seen better corporate citizens in my life.
In a tersely worded letter, Champagne questioned the company's commitment to Canada and said he was reviewing Amazon's business relationship with the government. Champagne called on Amazon to reconsider its decision, but refused to say what a review could achieve.
Trust me, I'm not going to tell them what I'm going to do in advance. That's called negotiation 101.
Amazon will take 2 months to wind down its operations in Quebec. Analysts say the government does have some tools to exert pressure.
Amazon provides web-based services to not just the Canadian government, but to governments all over the world. And this is a considerable source of revenue for Amazon. So governments do have some strategic power here.
The decision to exit Quebec comes as unionized workers at Amazon's Laval warehouse were negotiating for wage increases.
What they're saying to Quebecers and potentially Canadians is that, oh, we want you as customers, but we won't respect your rights as citizens, the right to form a union.
This isn't just about Amazon's practices in Quebec. Across the country, Amazon operates 72 facilities and employs more than 40,000 people. And workers in both Ontario and BC have been trying to unionize as well. Heather.
Judy, thank you for this. Donald Trump had more harsh words for Canada again today, this time claiming Canadians would have better health care coverage if the country were to become a U.S. state. And that's not all he had to say. CTV's Andrew Johnson is following the story for us this evening. Andrew.
Heather, this isn't the first time we've heard Donald Trump claim Canada would be better off as America's 51st state. Now he's suggesting Justin Trudeau has admitted Canada couldn't survive without the U.S. propping it up.
I asked him what would happen if we didn't do that, if we didn't subsidize Canada. He said we'd be a failed nation. And I said, then you should be a state.
The president made the comments this morning in North Carolina, where he's visiting communities affected by Hurricane Helene. He went on to claim Canadians would appreciate an American existence, paying lower taxes, and yes, benefiting from improved health care.
The Canadian citizens, if that happened, would get a very big tax cut, tremendous tax cut, because they're very highly taxed. And you wouldn't have to worry about military. You'd have better health coverage. You'd have much better health coverage. So I think the people of Canada would like it, you know, if it's explained.
People we spoke to today are saying no thanks.
I think as Canadians, we're very proud to be who we are, you know.
The man is a maniacal dictator, and there's nobody stopping him because everybody's so afraid of him.
Leave us alone. We're fine. We're good.
One expert believes targeting Canada is low-hanging fruit for Trump that pleases his base.
They like to see Donald Trump fight. They like to see Donald Trump go after his perceived enemies. And Canada, I think, is someone that he believes he can bully and he can beat up on.
This is all happening as Canada prepares to retaliate to the tariffs Trump has suggested he will slap on Canadian goods starting just over a week from today on February 1st. Heather.
The clock is ticking. Andrew, thank you. Donald Trump also confirmed reports today that Dr. Anthony Fauci has lost his federal security detail.
When you work for government, at some point your security detail comes off. And, you know, you can't have them forever.
Trump also telling reporters he would not feel responsible if something were to happen to Fauci. The doctor was a key advisor to Trump during the COVID-19 pandemic and grew critical of Trump as he tried to undermine public health guidance. He faced regular threats and had federal protection for several years. Coming up, a stolen cache of weapons.
It wouldn't be the first time that the RCMP was involved in trafficking firearms.
The investigation into how dozens of RCMP firearms went missing. Plus, border arrests, a clampdown on migrants trying to cross into Canada. Manitoba RCMP says 6 people from multiple countries have been arrested trying to illegally cross into Canada from the U.S. The Mounties beefed up their presence at the border this week with Black Hawk helicopters as Donald Trump took office. Police say the group was spotted from the air on January 14th, crossing on foot near Emerson, south of Winnipeg. They say some were not dressed for the freezing temperatures, and an ambulance was called to ensure their safety. At least 45 firearms have been stolen from the RCMP in the last decade. That includes handguns, rifles, shotguns, and even a grenade launcher. The worrisome details were revealed in a CTV News exclusive investigation. CTV's Kamal Karamali has more on the guns and what the Mounties have to say about it. Kamal.
Heather, an access to information request has led to concerning data. Hundreds of RCMP service weapons either lost or stolen since 2014. Out of the 45 service weapons reported stolen by the RCMP in the past 10 years, more than 30 were handguns, 7 rifles, 4 shotguns, and 1 grenade launcher. Roughly half of those stolen happened in 1 year back in 2016. There were 349 firearms lost by the RCMP. That included more than 200 handguns, over 40 rifles, and more than 80 shotguns. In total, nearly 400 were reported stolen or lost in that 10-year span, but more than half were recovered, leaving over 130 still missing. Firearm experts say they're concerned the missing handguns could be used to commit violent offenses and are speculating, based on the large number of firearms stolen, there could be gun trafficking happening within the Mounties.
It wouldn't be the first time that the RCMP was involved in trafficking firearms. It's extremely rare, to be fair, but it does happen. And so I would like, as a citizen, to see some serious investigation performed.
The RCMP have not responded to our request for comment, leaving many questions on which firearms are still out there and whose hands they're in. Heather.
Kamal, thank you. Still ahead, a critical care crisis, the growing nursing shortage, and a community with no access to medical help. The U.S. Coast Guard has come to the rescue after a huge Canadian freighter got stuck in the ice on Lake Erie off the Buffalo shoreline. The freighter Manitoulin got trapped in ice that was rapidly forming in below freezing temperatures. It was heading back to Sarnia, Ontario after dropping off a load of wheat. All 17 people on board were okay and the ship was not damaged. It's no secret Canada's healthcare system is facing significant challenges. A nursing shortage is just one of the many issues, and it's hitting rural Saskatchewan particularly hard, leaving one community without healthcare for 2 weeks. CTV's Alison Bamford takes a look at the gaps in the system and how patients are being impacted.
There's no nurses in the community at all.
The northern village of Beauval is in the middle of a 17-day stretch with no access to health care. Services temporarily stalled because there's no primary care nurses.
It's a major highway, 155, 165. Any emergencies on that highway depend on this clinic for first responders.
Recent data shows the number of rural nurses in Saskatchewan has dropped nearly 25% since 2018. Shortages that often force patients to find care elsewhere.
They have to then get in their cars and drive a significant amount of distance to enter into an emergency room where they could languish for days on end.
A Montreal Economic Institute report suggests for every 100 nurses Canada trains, 40 of them leave before their 35th birthday. And in the next 5 years, the country could be short more than 117,000 nurses.
It's pretty discouraging, honestly, seeing these people who, when I first started working with them, were so passionate about this, career path, and then ultimately picking another direction.
But Kyle Ferguson gets why they leave. He's thought about it too, often spread thin, dealing with high patient-to-nurse ratios. Stress compounded by Canada's simultaneous doctor drought.
We're really behind globally in the way we optimize our workforce.
But there's hope that could change. A new interpretation of Canada's Health Act will allow provincial health plans to cover primary care from nurse practitioners, pharmacists, and midwives starting next year. Resources often underutilized, but experts say are a key piece in filling the gaps. Allison Bamford, CTV News, Saskatoon.
After the break, landing a new record on ice. Meet the 12-year-old phenom gliding and leaping over the competition. A young Canadian athlete is taking the figure skating world by storm. The 12-year-old recently broke her own record at the National Junior Women's Championship in Quebec. CTV's Kathy Lee was at practice with her in Calgary and has more on this skating phenom. Kathy.
Heather, Leah trains here at the Glencoe Club in Calgary, and I was watching her practice this morning, and she was doing triple axel after triple axel after triple axel and landing quite a few of them. Now, for those who don't know, a triple axel requires a skater to rotate 3.5 times in the air. Now, to put things into perspective, it's very rare for a 12-year-old to be landing these types of jumps and doing all the spins and footwork that she is able to pull off. Last week at the National Figure Skating Championships in the junior category, Leah landed 7 triple jumps and beat her own record that she set in December at the Skate Canada Challenge.
I just felt so happy. Like, I just had like a pure joy in my face. I was like so happy. Like, same as challenge, and like this, it was just amazing. My favorite part of skating, just like showing people what I love to do, like every single day, like in front of like the guest people, or like skating competition with the big crowd.
Figure skating, especially in the women's category, has really evolved over the years. Young female skaters from countries like South Korea, Russia, and Japan are not only executing triple jumps, but also quads. Leah's coach says she is determined to compete on the world stage.
She is fearless and she really wants to push herself. So yeah, triple axel she's been working on, eventually some quads, which, you know, our goal is to do those, but then to be healthy and maintain her skating career as long as she can, for sure.
Leah has her eyes set on the Olympics one day. For now, because she's too young, that won't happen until she's 17 years old, but she will be eligible for the World Junior Championships in 2027. Heather.
Kathy, what an incredible athlete. Thank you so much. Certainly someone to keep our eyes on. That is our newscast for this Friday. Thank you all for joining us. I will be back later tonight with CTV National News at 11 for ongoing coverage of Canada's top stories. Tune into CTV News Channel. I'm Heather Butts. Your local CTV News starts right now.
CTV National News, Canada's #1 newscast.